Welcome to NewYorkBIO's Virtual Breakfast Series, a digital program started in 2020, bringing you fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Rana Hallaq, Senior Director and Partner at Pfizer Ventures.
I see. I have 901. So good morning, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks Bland, and I'm the CEO at NewYorkBIO. We are thrilled you're here to join us for another edition of our virtual breakfast series. We are especially thrilled to have NewYorkBIO board member and venture capitalist extraordinaire with Pfizer, Rana Hallaq. And a special thanks to Pfizer, obviously, for sponsoring this month's series of breakfast. So we're very excited to hear from an executive at Pfizer today about all the interesting things that they're focused on and that Rana has focused on throughout her career. So as always, the housekeeping reminders, please ask your questions. We know you have them for Rana in the Q&A or the chat feature, and Derek and I will get to them throughout the conversation this morning. With that, I will turn it back to Derek to start our conversation, and then we'll have a nice chat today. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. And I would add one more thing. So when we first started the breakfast series, our first guest was Barbara Dalton. And now for the virtual breakfast series, we are now at the 2-year mark. It is a 2-year anniversary of when we first started it. So it is almost poetic that we come full circle. We have Pfizer Ventures and Rana on with us this morning. So Rana, it is wonderful to have you. As we always do, we tend to start with a bit of an origin story. So why don't we kick off by you telling us a little bit about how you got where you are today?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I started off as a biologist, just loved biology and was looking at different areas of biology. My senior year of college, I went to a small liberal arts college called Hamilton. I took a neuroscience class, and by chance, we had a Nobel laureate, Paul Greengard, who had graduated from Hamilton, who came to speak. So that was my turning point. I instantly, fell in love with neuroscience. I ended up going to Georgetown to do my PhD in neuroscience, and I just thought it was the most fascinating thing. How can we take, chemical changes and biochemical changes and create memories that we can remember? How does a synapse kind of encode for memory of a grandmother? It was really fascinating to me, and it was also the decade of the brain. So it was a time where a lot was happening and very exciting. So I was studying the brain. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I went on and I did my postdoctoral work at NIH. And after a few years at the bench, had this question of how do I continue to apply what I'm doing to medicine? In some way, I kind of needed to see the application a little bit more directly. So I explored a number of different career options. I ended up being very lucky to be pulled into a company called Forest Labs, which became part of Activist. Allergan is now part of AbbVie. And I first joined actually the clinical development group. There was the head of the group was a PhD scientist, a statistician actually, and had hired a number of PhD scientists. And they were really looking to bring in PhD holders who could come in and run clinical trials, design trials, analyze data. And they were willing to train us on the pharma side, the clinical development side. So it was a great opportunity to make that transition. It was kind of a big jump to go from the lab right into clinical development in industry. Yeah. Very cool. Big jump. Very exciting to be running, phase 2, phase 3 studies in psychiatry, and really just being in the industry was really exciting. So I spent a few years there, and then I kept thinking, this is very interesting, but I also would like to take a step back and kind of think about the other aspects as well, right? Being a scientist, I wanted to be thinking about the mechanisms and all this other, the kind of the full range of things. Yeah. And so I ended up making a transition within Forest into business development. And at the time, Forest actually didn't really break up business development into different functions. So we did search and evaluate all the way through. So I could now apply my science training, my clinical development training, kind of thinking through all of these different aspects. And on the job, I was really trained for the business side and the transactions and the legal, transaction execution, all of that. So really great. And I love the job. The company went through a few transitions, and during one of the transitions, I moved to Pfizer. I've had a few roles at Pfizer. Been at Pfizer for about 7 years. Great company, and a great company to be able to actually also have different experiences, within one place. My first role was actually working with the neuroscience group. So I was pulled in, kind of sat on the clinical commercial side of the business and was working with our very early stage neuroscience portfolio and thinking about how do you make decisions and think strategically on these very early mechanisms and programs, and pulling through all the way to the commercial side, right, to the clinical development feasibility side as well as the commercial side. So trying to get that full range of thinking and what is the data package you would need to deliver to be able to really be convincing to be taken up into the clinical development group. And that was a great experience. And that was for us, we didn't have a discovery group. So that was really a good way to explore how do you make these very, very difficult decisions, as we all know, on very early stage programs. Yeah. And trying to factor in 1,000 different things, right? So I did that for a little bit, and then I actually did a very brief stint on the clinical development side at Pfizer, but then was really wanting to move back into business development. Just knew that very dynamic aspect was very exciting to me and a great place for me to land. So moved back into business development on the transactions team. And I never thought that I would have the opportunity. I always kind of dreamed of it, but it was, something out there to join the Pfizer Ventures team. A position opened up, and I applied. And so about 4 years ago, I was able to move into that group. And so I reported to Barbara Dalton. Eric, you mentioned Barbara; she's the head of our group, and we sit under the business development group. So it's a great place to be. We are, very active investors. The Pfizer Ventures team has, through the past 15 years, 12 years, I think Barbara's been leading it, really developed a great reputation in the field, and really is just a really strong place to have transitioned into, and to be trained up by Barbara and Bill and Elaine and Margie, who have since left. But it's been a great experience. So that's where I am now. I've kind of been lucky enough, I think, to be able to do different things and see different aspects of drug development. So it's great.
Yep. Well, it's also special Sorry, I was going to say it's also special this morning because we now have double the number of Hamilton graduates that we usually have on the webinar.
That's right.
So,
that's right.
Yeah, that's right.
Eric and I are connected.
We are. We overlap very briefly. I would ask. So, what are some of the places kind of early on in your learning curve as you were going up business development that you thought were pretty kind of foundational, right? Like, what were some of the things that came really naturally as a scientist, and what are some of the things where you had to kind of park the scientist brain over here and really kind of change a bit in order to kind of settle into a BD role?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would say that my first meetings in business development, kind of just being thrown in. I think I went to a partnering conference on my own on day one. I think my wonderful manager who hired me and who I actually love, John Guerin, he happened to not be able to make it, so it kind of worked out. Yeah. But sitting in on meetings, it was the first time I felt I did not understand what was being said. It was the language was different, yes. Terminology was different, and having been on the science side, and I mean Hamilton is liberal arts college, so we did different things, but obviously nothing so technically heavy, right?
Right.
So it was. I would say I could actually feel my brain shifting. It was a strain on my brain to make that transition into the business side. It was the first time I really felt like I could feel the muscle, working. And it really had to do, I would say the biggest shift was, maybe not even parking the science side, but flipping it upside down, right? We go in and we say, here's all the data, and you make a decision and you tell me if you like it and whatever. Mm-hmm. But coming into the business, you really want to, show the business proposition, right? What's the right. proposal? What do you have? What are you claiming? And then you kind of support that with all the science and all of the, commercial assessments and everything else. But it was very difficult to let that go, because you always wanted to kind of have a disclaimer like, well, the study hasn't been done, but if it were, and we did, here's the data, but actually it's only in these cells and not these cells. And so you kind of just had to, I don't know, it was very hard. That was probably the hardest part. Not everything is, so data specific when you're telling the story. Obviously, everything has to be backed up with that. And I think the risk assessment, you're coming in and you're saying, we think this is a great program, but we don't actually have the data. We haven't run the studies, but I still want you to really, take this risk with us, and to be able to, to be able to really speak about risk in that way, I think was a big change to I think in science, we can, put an experiment forward and just not claim any direction that it's going to end, right?
Yeah.
But in this, you kind of have to say, well, we're taking the risk because we actually think it might end up here. And that's a reasonable risk because we've tried to de-risk it in all these different ways. So I think risk assessment was a big, big shift too.
Right.
Yeah.
You felt like I do sometimes on this webinar with the science side. this lawyer has no science background. You made your journey to Pfizer Ventures sound very linear in the retelling of it, but I suspect it wasn't. For those who might be on the webinar listening, talk to us about sort of what were some of those inflection points that made you decide to take the leap into a different avenue within the company.
Yeah, Jennifer, I love that question because for me, it really bothers me actually when I hear linear stories. And if we had more, I didn't want to take up too much time, but kind of to say what was going through my mind, right? So when I was a postdoc, well, so even starting before, right? My first question was, do I want to be on the research side at the bench? And my decision was, I would like to go to NIH. I was offered a position at NIH for my postdoctoral work because if I love research at NIH, not worrying about the grant writing, just the pure research and kind of designing experiments in a field, then I'll know that, right? And I got to NIH and I liked it, but I thought, there's some people here who they do not want to leave the lab. They just want to be constantly thinking about their next experiment. And that wasn't me exactly. I wanted to do other things and, be out there talking to people. So, I explored a lot and, we used to call it like alternative careers, right? Now those are more generally the careers that everyone has. And I explored a number of different things, editing at a journal, being an editor of a journal, different opportunities. And this one I thought was really great because it was a way to get into the pharmaceutical world and to apply that. So that was my driver. And then when I was in clinical development, I thought it was really interesting, without an MD, I wondered what is the trajectory, being a neuroscientist, is it good to kind of be, just focus in on neuroscience, or should I was interested in expanding too. So in a way that my move onto the business side was really like, I want to take a step back and I want to understand how all the components come together. And I want to be able to talk, across the different therapeutic areas. And clinical development is one aspect of it, but it's not everything, to getting a drug to market. So what are those other things? So the decisions were a little bit that. And then I think the opportunities that opened up, I was able to get into the business development side, but it wasn't, it happened just because I'd spoken to a couple of people and it worked out that way. So not all opportunities were like, this is, the road had to open up, and luckily it did. Yeah.
So do you have any advice for, go ahead.
Sorry. I was going to say, I think one of the clear decisions that that was maybe a little bit unusual is that I decided I really would love to get back onto the business development venture side. That was for me like a driver. I think having tried different things and realizing that was a really great fit for me. And I'm doing other things, but that's where I want to head back. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for kind of younger scientists in the, getting out of their PhD or in their postdoc now, who are actually, considering, things like corporate development and things like that? How would you suggest to those kind of folks that they either start to get involved or start to make the connections that, could maybe help them explore that career path?
It's a tough question. It's a good question. Can I just ask, are you getting feedback from me or?
A little bit, yeah.
I can hear you okay.
Okay, I'm not sure how to help that. Okay, so, I think sometimes it's not, I would say that maybe the career decisions aren't always, getting to the end point from, square one to the end. Mm-hmm. So I always think of it as maybe trying to get closer and closer to some of these things. So if there's an opportunity that allows you to be a little bit closer to the business development side and maybe, getting exposure to supporting deal assessment or working on the commercial assessment side, or, there are different components of it. I think there are more opportunities now to consult, to be a consultant and maybe help some of these, as smaller companies or smaller consulting groups that help with business development deals. But I think trying to get I think as close as possible in some capacity and starting to learn that. It's not obviously not a direct path. And I think that makes it really hard. We don't have like you do this and you end up there, and people come at it from so many different ways. I know that our business development group at Forest had, people from all different backgrounds, but there was, I think no two people came to it from the same side, right? We had one lawyer who transitioned to business development. We had an accountant who, transitioned. So everybody kind of did different things. But I'd say that if that's the interest, talking to as many people as possible, obviously being able, being willing. And I think this is what I did, because I really just wanted to learn different aspects, and I wasn't thinking about moving up. I was thinking, I just want to learn clinical development. So it was, lateral move, then it was business development, it was a lateral move. So I think also being willing to do that, if that's where you want to get close to, I think that's reasonable too. Yeah.
Oh, here we have I think an appropriate question. It says, what are your thoughts on entering biopharma business development from a tech transfer experience?
Yes, I think that's a perfectly reasonable and very, appropriate way to do it. Again, so my mentor in business development, John, he had to enter through that route, and I think a number of other people do. It's a great way to be on the other side of, getting technology out, but then also kind of thinking about the whole process. What is the data package? How do you present it? I mean, I think being able to get any, subset of the skills for business development anyway, then you can kind of, get somebody to help you get the rest of it, right? Have that inroad that then gets you there. So I think tech transfer is a very reasonable approach.
Yeah, the skill set is the same. You're just maybe applying it differently in different settings.
You also,
and it's also very helpful to,
Go ahead, Rana. Yeah, no, I was going to say most of the offices have kind of they get their interns and stuff as PhD students and as postdocs. So you can actually dip your toe in the water in a lot of ways into tech transfer if you're in an academic research environment.
I was just going to add too that it's really helpful for, on the venture side or business development side, to know how to interact with tech transfer offices and, the limitations or what's needed there. And so I think if you've seen it from the inside, obviously that's really helpful.
Yeah. So can we bend a little bit towards kind of corporate venture capital? I think I think a lot of people know Pfizer Ventures as, a fund, although it's probably best to recognize that there's a few different flavors of what a corporate venture capital group is. Some of them are standalone venture funds. Some of them are, quote unquote, strategic funds that do much more on kind of the corporate development side. Do you want to give just a couple of minutes on, kind of Pfizer's stance as a corporate venture group, and then we can kind of go on from there?
Yeah, that's fair, because it does really run the range, right? So Pfizer Ventures we have two objectives: financial and strategic. Financial, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. The strategic aspect, the way that we kind of look at it is, we would like to be investing in areas that are now, but maybe more so in the future, of interest to Pfizer. So where are things heading, and which programs could be of interest, or which areas of science, and really kind of pushing into the future. So we do sit independently. We are informed by what our internal strategy is. So we'd like to, our strategy is also, pretty broad. We cover a lot of different therapeutic areas. So we'd like to stay somewhat aligned to it. We're not completely independent like some groups are that are investing. Some groups actually would invest in areas that are not being worked on internally. Mm-hmm. That's not really our case. It's areas that we are in, and we'd like to take those adjacencies and push them out a little bit farther, and explore other areas. And obviously it's a lot easier to be doing that through an external investment versus trying to set up all these different areas internally. So we are strategically aligned, but it doesn't mean that we're tied to the strategy, or that we have to fit in right into the strategy. We're kind of on that periphery.
You have a fuzzy line around it, slightly.
Yes, yeah.
So
and then I think just to say, neuroscience is an exception to that.
Oh yeah, right.
Yeah.
How is neuroscience an exception?
We exited neuroscience research, internal research, a few years ago, And that's actually when I joined the Pfizer Ventures team. And we're investing in neuroscience. We continue to work internally on the rare disease side. And so our investments they're generally rare, but we've also made some investments beyond that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Where we don't work internally. Yeah.
And do you find that, oh, sorry, now I'm echoing. Do you find that Pfizer Ventures is sort of the mainstream of the corporate venture sort of structure? Or do you think Pfizer Ventures is organized sort of differently than your colleague corporate venture organizations?
I think, again, I think it's a range. I would say we're somewhere in the middle of that range. I think, I think there are groups that are very much, this is our area of interest. We'd like you to make an investment in this company, right? They're kind of, their strategy drives that. And then there are others that are saying that this is our strategy. We want you to invest outside of that. And so we're somewhere in the middle where it's a give and take. And we, again, we have an investment committee, an advisory committee that really, helps us, guides us, right? Or, that we have to go through, but they're not, where we aren't given kind of the internal strategy and said, go invest in these companies. So it's a very good collaboration. And I think it helps, I think it's great. We bring things to the organization that are maybe, just kicking off, right? With these, small companies. I think Barbara calls them star clusters. You'll suddenly find like 3 companies in this brand new area that we've never really seen anything in. And so we can bring those to the organization, and then we have a give and take, and of course being able to engage our internal subject matter experts in our diligence and in that discussion is huge. So it's very collaborative, but yeah.
We've got a couple of questions around the business development / what does the investment, here's one, what does the investment opportunity set look like today in general versus several years ago, maybe when you joined Pfizer Ventures? And how does Pfizer think about this, what stage of companies to look at?
So I'm going to go with the second one, and I'm going to ask you to repeat the first question because I'm not sure I got it. But the Pfizer Ventures, the stage of companies. So we are, I'd say our sweet spot is Series A. So we invest only in private companies. We don't invest we don't come into a public company, right? So we're looking at companies that we can be working with. We generally take board seats in the companies that we invest in. So we really want to be able to engage with the company for a period of time, right? So for us, maybe a crossover round, which these days maybe doesn't exist, but a crossover round might be a little bit late in the game just because we aren't able to really participate in the company in any way. So Series A has been an ideal place. We invest in seed rounds, Series B, Series C. And of course, these are the initial investments. Once we're invested in a company, we'll invest all the way through the IPO. So I think what those rounds even mean has shifted quite a bit in the last few years. So we generally, we'll invest pretty early, like a platform that maybe has some leads coming off the platform. I think maybe platform alone might be a little bit early for us. So it kind of, if you think about the stage of development, that's the stage. And sometimes we'll come into a company that's, kicking off a clinical study. Again, that could be a little bit late in the game for us just because those are generally headed toward the public market or acquisition or something. So pretty broad. So that's the second question, but Jennifer, can you repeat the first one?
Yeah, the first was so we're going to make it general terms. So maybe I'm editing. What does the investment opportunities, what do those look like today versus when you started at Pfizer Ventures? Are you seeing more early stage companies in which to invest, or, what does the ecosystem look like?
I would say, that's a good question. I don't know that I've seen too much of a difference. Things come and go, but it also depends on just what kind of deal flow we're getting or what we're hearing about. But I would say in terms of volume, I think COVID has just enabled things to move at warp speed. And so we're seeing just a tremendous amount of kind of inflow. But I think in terms of, from a platform versus later stage or something like that, no major shifts. In terms of therapeutic area, there have been some shifts. So oncology has obviously constantly been incoming. We have seen, a great deal of cell therapy companies. We actually don't invest in cell therapy technology currently. So, but we have seen that that's a big, bulk of that. We've seen more neuroscience. I think the neuroscience shift is happening. A lot of rare neuro, but also broader neuro, and a lot more investor engagement on the neuroscience side, and commitment, and kind of, clear statement of interest. And of course, the RNA gene editing, all of that is just blowing up. LNP technology and all of that, which of course we're very excited about, because that is an area of extreme interest to us, and we're looking for opportunities in that space. So it comes and goes. The waves of what we're seeing come and go. We were seeing a lot of fibrosis companies earlier on. We still see a number of new fibrosis targets, and that's an interest too. But it comes and goes in terms of therapeutic area. But the overall stage of companies, I don't know that I've noticed that much of a difference. Yeah.
Well, from the capital side too, I imagine it's interesting, because it's not like Pfizer goes and raises a new fund every year, right? So you're actually part of the venture ecosystem, but without kind of going out to LPs. So one of the things I was going to ask you is, how do the conversations go internally when everyone in venture goes and raises these large funds and then starts deploying things in larger and larger rounds, right? If an A round is 150 million instead of 50 million, I imagine you guys have to go and explain to a group somewhere, it's like, well, we actually kind of need more money than we had before because everyone else is spending more money. What do those conversations look like? Because it's not the same as, we're going to raise this fund and we'll tell you how we did in 8 years. You kind of have a little bit of a shorter timeline than that.
Yes, yeah, it's true. It's a very different dynamic. So we have, I think about 5 years ago, 2018, 4 years ago, whatever it was, we had announced that, capital allocation, right, for the ventures team. So we've been investing out of that. So it's 600 million, I think. And so that's what we continue to do. But to your point, there is a great deal of shift. And so we have constant conversations with our investment committee and our management on the dynamics that are shifting, right? So if we would like to continue to participate in these very, very hot fields, right? So RNA technology, gene, all of this is really just, it's hard to dabble.
Yeah.
And we would also like to participate in an active way. So we'd like a board seat. We'd like to sit, and in that case, the investment is larger, right? So we're having those conversations. We continue. We've actually pushed up, I think, our investment. What we used to say, we invest between 5 and 10 million to start, and now we say it's higher than that. I think we've kind of acknowledged that in order to move with the field, we do need to grow that. So, and I think internally, everybody, I think that the individuals in management that we work with are aware, and they've seen the shift, and so it's a constant conversation. You're right, it's not kind of an LP that you come back to at a certain point in time necessarily, but it's more of a constant conversation. And it has been interesting to see, because we've had to make decisions, right? Does that make sense for us, right? If again, our kind of strategy isn't for pure financial returns, and so owning a piece of small percentage of a company doesn't necessarily meet all of our objectives. We may do that because both of financial and strategic are objectives, but it has been a conversation we've been actively having for the past 2 years, right? In these raises that were, I think there was one that was like, this is a Series A/crossover. We're like, I don't know what to do with that, That's a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. This company is just going to go straight to exit. They've got an idea, and they're just going to exit. They're going to raise the round, and then it's also going to be an exit.
That's right. That's right.
I don't think we quite got there, but it seemed like we were going to get there for a while. We have another related question here, which is a good one. And Christine says, in the VC world, it's often said, if I don't know you, I don't pick up the phone. So how do you approach, new contacts, and how do you approach kind of working within syndicates and stuff within the venture world? Again, how do you play, the part that Pfizer can play in the larger venture ecosystem?
I would say that if that's the case, it's not necessarily by, the comment, it's not necessarily by design. I think given that we do work in syndicate, we're always investing in syndicate. So we have so many touch points and new companies and new investment opportunities that are coming in our normal, just everyday discussion. So it's not necessarily that you're trying to avoid certain people, it's just that you are trying to keep up with the inflow, right? But I do think we make you know, I think we make a good deal of effort. Barbara is very, you know, out in the world, right? And meeting and mentoring, you know, companies and entrepreneurs, and is just constantly kind of in touch with people, not just in a very small ecosystem. You know, I do that as well, you know, mentor for different initiatives in New York. And, you know, that's an opportunity to help and to meet and to possibly even bring in for them to meet Pfizer people. These are new entrepreneurs, you know, startup companies that haven't quite figured out how to connect to the investor world, and so we can help them do that. So I think there does have to be some, you know, active process for that. I think that, you know, I think this is something that we've talked a lot about, which is Dee and I, that also enables us to go out beyond the, you know, the individuals that have had this and done this over and over again. We actually want to allow other people to kind of come into the community, into the ecosystem, and really be able to thrive here. So I think it takes a little bit of an active effort, and I think it's great. I mean, working with these young startup companies that are, you know, have an idea and a technology and are really figuring their way out. It's just incredible. I think it's very inspiring to see, you know, that drive and that purpose. So I think we all can do what we can. Yeah.
So is there a lot of kind of pull through and transparency to the therapeutic area heads or therapeutic area teams when you're looking at a new venture or an opportunity? So if you go and you're in kind of a partnering discussion, it's standard and normal to meet kind of the science team around the therapeutic area. I imagine you must look at so much stuff that I don't know that you can do that on everything that you do, but what's the interplay like between the scientists at Pfizer and the external science that you're looking at?
Yeah, I would say there is quite a bit that I might be able to say, okay, this doesn't necessarily look like what our strategy is, or maybe the company isn't the right company for an investment, you know, that's not the right stage, or, you know, the management team, you know, isn't fully kind of built up, and maybe we need a little bit more because, you know, there's somewhere where we can't actually work with them very closely or something. So there's maybe that initial conversation, but then the next conversation is to really go to our search and evaluate colleagues, the ones who are out there also scouting and looking to see, and also understand kind of where our strategy is in a very, very intimate way, and who the individuals are that might be able to help with diligence. So we do work very closely with them in diligence. They are a core part of that team, and they're able to pull individuals from our rare disease unit or oncology unit. And then I would say that, you know, we're also very careful because we make sure that we firewall, or we, you know, are very sensitive to that distinction, right? So if there's anything that's happening internally, we could go to external parties. We could find, you know, individuals within Pfizer who know that space, who don't work in that research unit or something like that. So we work very closely, but in a very tailored, you know, specific way. And it is the beauty of working in a corporate venture group like ours. I mean, not all venture groups actually pull into their internal colleagues, but the fact that we do is really great, because we're also, you know, I'm also hearing about where the field is, you know, the cutting edge based, you know, from our scientists, and how this company's technology might fit into that. So I'm also constantly just learning and the different areas from our scientists. So it's a great resource. I mean, it's a great, not even a resource, it's a great partnership that we have. We really work very closely. I will add to that though, for anybody who has questions around that, is what happens after we've invested. So if we make the decision to invest and we sit on the board, now we're board members, and it is a very, very clear distinction of where we sit and where our internal groups sit, right? So there's a very clear firewall at that point. Any conversations that happen from there on in terms of partnership or anything else, you know, we are not involved. So now we kind of have a separate role as a board member, and then we have our search and evaluate colleagues take that on as a typical business development interaction.
Your fiduciary transfers to the organization on which you sit on the board.
That's perfectly said. As a lawyer, that's great.
And it's interesting because there is kind of the strategic investor signaling, if you will, right? So when Pfizer's name is on the cap table, at least to the external world, there's a little bit of, you know, implicit thing there that's like, yes, Pfizer thinks this is good, so people actually, they put that in the back of their minds from either a partnering or an exit standpoint. And it may not exactly be that way from a financial standpoint, but there is that signaling as soon as they see your name on the masthead.
I think it's fair, right? I think based on how we make our decisions, it means it's been vetted, and yes, it's an area of interest. What that means for the company long term may be that we continue to work, and that if we need maybe to ask for assistance from someone internally, we can go and help the company by pulling in a colleague to take a look at some tox work or something like that. Something that's very specific. But yeah, I think it's a fair signal. This is my first venture role. It's been interesting to me to see, to hear about the signaling from the outside world. So things that I was kind of maybe not surprised to hear, but they were new thoughts to me, which is like, well, we'd like to pull in a strategic investor, but we don't want one. If we're going to bring in one, we want two, because we don't want anybody. So I was like, oh, well, that's I never would have thought about that.
Right.
So there's a lot to that signaling, I guess, that
Yes.
I hadn't fully appreciated from being internal at Pfizer. But
And from the investee company, that making sure they're thinking about the right signaling right to the market as to who is on their cap table. It's as much
right.
probably psychological as it is practical.
That's
in
right.
some
Yeah.
respects. We actually have a bunch of questions
There's
from
a
the
lot of
audience, so I
questions.
want to make sure that we can get to some. We have what should be a layup from your New York Bio board member colleague, Bob Easton. What has been your biggest win in your business development venture roles?
Oh, Bob, that's a tough question. My biggest win. I don't know. I think from the business development side, maybe it was the acquisition of a company called Purex when I was at Forest. I thought it was a really great interaction between, maybe it's just because of a very strong learning experience, but it was a really a great interaction between kind of thinking about how to manage the risk. So our internal team was looking at the asset. We really liked the asset, and kind of like, but we would like, we had questions around the scheduling of the asset or the success of that. And we were able to really structure the deal in a way that made everybody comfortable. So we had CVRs involved and that sort of thing. So it was just a beautiful way to solve for a problem. And I think that was just a great, just one that stands out. I mean, I think that currently in our venture investing role, there's a great company that led investment in very early stage, very small team, first time CEO, and they have an option to be acquired by AbbVie that they're working through. So I think that I'd say that that's a great win, just given the very straightforward purpose of the company and the fact that they've been moving forward. So, fingers crossed everything works out for Metakainen, but it's been a great experience. And that was one of my early investments too. So that one stands out.
We have two AI machine learning questions, so we can kind of throw both of them at you at once. So I'm going to just mash them together and just see if you could talk about your experience with, AI and machine learning companies over the last, say, few years. What have you seen that's challenging? What have you seen that's really promising? Without saying certain, et cetera.
Sure, yeah. I would say we are maybe overwhelmed by the number of opportunities that come in. It has been challenging knowing, being a biologist, and the rest of our team are really on the drug development side. So people are PhD scientists have come into the venture world. So not being AI machine learning experts, what we're trying to do now is kind of identify ways that we can really proactively assess it. So what we have invested in these in certain technologies. We do make investments if we have opportunities that come in from our internal groups. Our internal group might say, well, we've been using this technology, or we think we'd really love this company to continue because we love what they're doing and we want to see them grow. They'll come to us and they'll have already assessed it, on the AI machine learning. And so they might say that we've already done the vetting and we already think that this is the one. And so that helps us kind of get there. The other direction of us going to them and saying, well, we've gotten these, 50 opportunities. What do you think about this one that we think is great? That is a little bit more difficult to do until we get that full, kind of set of expertise. And so we've been having those discussions. I think that the challenge is really knowing how to prioritize, or which one is the right fit for us in Pfizer Ventures. And that's been a big struggle. That being said, we are very interested in the space, and so the question is on us right now in terms of how are we going to prosecute these, and how many investments do we make in that space versus the therapeutic space, which has been mostly our focus. So it's a huge question, and one of, I think, active discussion. So hopefully we'll have an answer soon.
Yeah. we have some very specific, as you would expect, questions about your Pfizer Ventures investment areas and things like that. But we also have a more broad question. What are your top diligence metrics if you're evaluating new ventures? So more broadly.
Yeah, that's a good question.
It is a good question, and it's very hard because it comes back to, case by case somewhat, but just broadly, right? One is, I think, the easiest one is kind of, is it an area of strategic interest? So again, we aren't investing in cell therapy, so that one, we can kind of say we aren't investing in ophthalmology, unless it's maybe gene therapy is an exception to that. So there's some things that kind of are very high level. Then the diligence really comes back to the scientific technical diligence, which again, we're able to pull in our subject matter experts if we're not one of us on the team. The syndicate around the table, I think, is a key one. Who are the investors? How has the company been built to date? Who will we be working with? I think that's another key part of diligence. And then I think, just making sure that we have the right team in place to take it forward. Barbara's, always reminding us it's the, we're investing in the people, because we all acknowledge that technologies and assets aren't necessarily going to move forward. There's a huge risk here, right, in drug development. And so really the question is then what do you do? How do you pivot? How do you take the company? How do you work through those? And I think that comes back to the people, and then of course the board as well. So I'd say, at a high level, that's the case. Diligence in terms of what we expect to see at a certain stage, of a company or something like that, that really does come back to case by case. So, we're seeing more and more, maybe we need some non-human primate data, for some area versus others that it's more like, do we have any hits?
We had another quick one here. Do you think about the disparity between public and private valuations in making investment decisions?
We do when we're looking at later stage companies. Well, I mean, even early stage companies, if they're astronomical valuations, obviously we need to take that into consideration because we are thinking about the long term, right? But if you're looking at just at a kind of a somewhat standard, valuation, whatever that is for that space, and it's very early, we can you can only plan so much, right, in terms of where they're going. You do want to make sure that you're setting it up so that the company is growing and has room to grow, and that depends on the stage. Of course, again, there are upsets along the way, and so maybe you need to take a step back and all of that. But
yeah,
so we are thinking about it, but we're in the stage that we're investing. Often we aren't limited by it. It's still quite early.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to make sure we're covering some of these.
I think we're pretty. No, I keep scrolling back and forth.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
We actually, this is a good one. It's going to flip us back a little bit. I don't think it's going to set us back. It says you touched on how PhDs can get more involved in the business development venture space, but now flip that around. And do you have recommendations for those with more traditional pharma BD finance roles that want to gain exposure more to the science side?
Yes, that's a good question too. I think I've been asked that question. So it's a little tricky. I would say, in pharma, we are, at least at Pfizer, I think at other large pharma, there is a separation of roles within business development, right? So sometimes people kind of are maybe on the transactions or on the business assessment side, and really would like to kind of be on that earlier side. I would say that, my time at Forest was unique. It was at a time that Forest still had integrated the role into one. And so it's possible that at a smaller company, you get more of that exposure. So, you could be working on the business development side and supporting the commercial assessments or the business development assessments of assets. But at the same time, you really do you are expected to also be able to speak to the science, and you kind of get in grades. So I think finding the right setting for what you want to do is really helpful. And of course, if you have those skills, you come in, you offer skills in a setting that allows you to do other things. I didn't appreciate it as much when I first joined Forest, but it really was an opportunity to learn the full range of things. So that was true in business development. It was also true in clinical development. We hadn't separated out the clinical and the scientific and the operational side of the group. So we did everything. And in the US, actually, at the time, we didn't use CROs. So we were on the phone with sites. We were sending them supplies, all the way through going to the FDA, answering questions and, designing the study. I mean, doing kind of the whole thing. And I think early on, it's that, for transition, that makes it a lot easier because you start to gain those skills. Being separated into a function gets a little bit, trickier. And so the right setting, I think, will help.
And I also think that I think just like in anything, and like you said earlier, like being open to asking those questions, looking for opportunities to expand your knowledge base within any organization, right? Rather than just trying it. If you try to only stay in your lane, then you're not going to be able to expand your role. So.
I think that's right. I think making that your goal versus making having your goal be kind of I'm moving to more senior roles. I think that then you can find your way. So actually, right when you were saying that, Jennifer, I was thinking, well, it's actually, at Pfizer, there's a lot of encouragement to see different parts of the organization, and we have, and I'm sure other pharma do this too, secondments, right? You go and you spend some time doing something. So there is a desire and a lot of support, even in these larger organizations, to do that. And I think if you make that your goal, you're right. I think you can find it in different ways in the different size organizations or different environments. Yeah.
So we have a question here that says, are there any specific Pfizer VC support groups for founders who identify as BIPOC? I would also extend it to maybe your thoughts on kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion in biotech founders and new venture creation.
So was the beginning of the question, does Pfizer Ventures have a way to support that specifically?
Yeah, the question was phrased, does Pfizer Ventures have a way to support that specifically? But even broader than that, we could open up this topic.
Yes. And it is a topic that the three of us have been talking about, and we continue to try to work on. We don't have anything specific, but I will say we are very aware, and we have these conversations. And actually, I think now we are kind of discussing making it a more explicit kind of goal of our companies, right? So I think the conversation has been happening, and I think it's a very free conversation. We could talk at the board level, about making sure that we're aware of these topics and really thinking more holistically, right? So when I joined Pfizer Ventures, Pfizer Ventures before the group expanded was I think there was Bill and there were a number of women, right? So it was kind of a shift, and I think that actually I think that just came with an awareness and a lot of just open conversation about it. I think just being able to have that open conversation, right? And we talk about that still at Pfizer Ventures. We have companies where maybe the CEO is a brown CEO, right? And it's not the people he has pulled in have been very diverse in all different across all the different categories. And so I think that encouraging that, encouraging investments in companies that kind of meet those expectations, and then kind of helping them find anybody who isn't be able to find the right individuals. So I think that all we are trying to do now is have the open conversation and really ask people to take a look and kind of make it an open conversation and an active search. And I think that that's what we're doing. So we don't have a separate set of funds that we set aside. And interestingly, I have heard of other companies that are doing that, and I think that that's very exciting. Investing in funds that are led by minorities. So I think that that's a really great initiative that I'm hoping we can also kind of get on board with, make something a little bit more formal, but at this point we aren't.
Yeah.
Is there more to that question that I forgot?
Well, and I was going to say, and for the, for the audience, for those who are regular listeners, they've heard me talk about our New York Bio Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force, Rana, on which you sit. We've had some great Pfizer input on that. And one of the areas we're looking at is from an ecosystem perspective, how we can support entrepreneurs of diverse backgrounds, right? Like what are programs we can.
Did we lose Jennifer?
It looks like she froze. It looks like she froze. I actually thought it was.
Oh,
there you go. You're back now.
Okay.
So yes.
You froze for a little bit. Yep.
I was brilliant. Hopefully you heard me. But I was just saying that it's important, and we are working on it from the New York Bio Task Force about supporting entrepreneurs of diverse backgrounds.
I love that it's a conversation. I hope that at some point we'll be able to, I think as organizations, we've gotten comfortable talking about women in leadership roles. And I'm really looking forward to it being just as, normal everyday conversation to be talking about people of color,
Yep.
Sexual orientation, all of it, just normal. I think there's still, people are, still find it a very sensitive topic. And I think the goal is for us to get to the point where it's not a sensitive topic. It's just a matter of fact, right? This is who we are. We all acknowledge that there are underrepresented individuals in or groups in these different roles, and we're all here to, help each other up and, work our way through it. So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We actually had a question, and I think this comes back to your background, right? So we had a question about, is progress being made in Alzheimer's disease, or are we still stumbling in the dark, right? That was the question. And then as you think about the role, the choices that Pfizer Ventures has made to invest in neuroscience, that certainly outside your current, right, your current pipeline, talk to us about what you see from a neuroscience perspective with Alzheimer's or other rare diseases.
So I think it's a very timely question with all that's happening in the Alzheimer's world. I do think we are making progress. We at Pfizer, before I joined the Pfizer Ventures team, had invested and basically, helped start up the Dementia Discovery Fund. And we're actually investors in the second fund as well. And there are other investments that we've made in the space, looking at novel mechanisms. So I think that, as pharma had gotten to the point of looking at the amyloid hypothesis, that's a heavy lift, right? And we've done a lot of work there. I think that the phase for the ventures world is really to explore these other mechanisms that we hadn't been able to prioritize. There hadn't been enough investor, focus, because everybody was kind of focused on the amyloid hypothesis, 10 years ago or whatever it was, when those investments were coming through. So I think that there is a lot, and there are a number of really interesting mechanisms. And I think that our investment in the Dementia Discovery Fund kind of keeps us engaged in the forefront of that, right? So looking at, retrotransposable elements, looking at just novel protein modifications, things that, we had been invested in a company that was looking at gingipain, from oral gingivitis infection. So there's a lot out there to explore, and I love that there's so much investor interest now, I think, in taking those forward and really vetting which are the most exciting ones. So I don't think that we're ready to necessarily, solve Alzheimer's, but the wave that's coming, this early stage wave, is really exciting to me, and it continues to build. And that's another wonderful thing. It's not a wave that's kind of coming and then going. I feel like it's still building. So I'm hoping that it'll bring a lot of good opportunities.
Yeah. It feels like in a number of areas, since the technologies and the tools have advanced a lot, it seems like we are at least starting to tease apart the biology a little bit better, right? We aren't necessarily hitting cancer with a sledgehammer anymore. And there are other areas where we seem to be mechanistically at least slightly smarter about the way that we're going about things from a biology standpoint, so that hopefully we're being smarter about the way that we're trying to treat things.
Yep, breaking down, I think we talked about this on the neurodegeneration space, right? Breaking it down like oncology has, kind of using that as a playbook. And really trying to identify biomarkers so you can separate out populations that you can really, effectively treat, that sort of thing. I think we are getting there, and I think that that approach has shifted quite a bit, and I think that's why we're seeing also so much on the rare disease space, is that approach is a way to identify, to kind of focus in on that biology, that one pathway maybe in this subset of patients, but not in that subset of patients. So I do think it's hopefully a smarter way, but it's more tailored, it's more, precision medicine kind of focused. And I think you're right, the technology is also advancing. So hopefully we'll have better biomarkers that'll help us identify those patient populations and really be able to target that. And there's a huge, diagnostics effort with Gates and ADDF. And so there's a lot that will continue to support. And I think the regulatory environment has changed. So I think there's a lot that will continue to support moving all of these things forward, hopefully.
Right. And obviously maybe it's my own bent as, former government affairs and policy, but I don't think we can underestimate the changes that are necessary in the regulatory regime to allow these new developments to actually not only come to market, but to be utilized by patients and payers.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
we can't do it without them.
Yeah. And for those who want, we had a patient engagement summit a few weeks ago, and we actually had a biomarkers panel that I thought was really interesting. So that should be up on our YouTube in the next week or so if people want to pop in and look at that.
Yep, there's going to be a lot added to there. I'm glad you brought up the patient side of thing. We have a few minutes left, and Rana, maybe this is a good time to kind of talk about how we think about the patient involvement in early stage innovation. How do we actually interact with patients now, and how do you think we could actually do better with it in the future to make sure that kind of those groups are involved early on, so that when we have these policy challenges, they don't come up at approval, they come up kind of 10 years beforehand, so the actual wave can all move in concert.
Right. No, I think it's critical, and I love that NewYorkBIO is making this such a focus and bringing together the different players. So we, I would say that it used to be that you would think about having maybe somebody on the patient engagement side. Once the program was in pharma and you really needed to get through the clinical development, kind of late clinical development into the commercialization phase. I think things are shifting, and I think they'll continue to shift in this direction. We have a company that's that we're talking to that's has a preclinical stage asset. They have not gone into IND enabling work, so they're quite a bit still preclinical, and they have a patient engagement individual on the senior leadership team. So we've discussed this because I think that's the way to do it, right? I think having that, not just when you're starting to think about clinical development, but when you're really just thinking about the disease that you're treating and how you're going to go about it and understanding the patients and everything else. So I think being able to engage the right people as early as possible. We often, with these small companies, you may not have a CMO until a certain time, but I would say that you can maybe identify a consultant CMO, but patient advocacy is kind of very specific to your program and to the indication that you're going after. And I would say that that's going to become just as critical as a CMO as early as possible. So I like that. I think it's important. And I would say that we will also learn how to work with these groups and these individuals better once we have them kind of across all of the different companies, right? I think they're still maybe sparsely, available, but I think we'll be able to really learn a lot from that. Yeah. And I think the whole, natural history studies of patient populations that we don't know about, I think that's just enabling all of that to really start to occur. And you can only really do that very early on when you're developing. So the earlier, the better.
And we're also seeing patient foundations doing more drug discovery research themselves, right? And that, I think, just elevating the importance of involving the patient community in all aspects of drug discovery and development is going to be a win for patients at the end. So,
that's right. Right.
I think that's Rana, thank you so much. We are at the top of the hour, so thank you so much for participating today. We certainly value the time that you share with us and our audience. We hope everyone has a good day, and we'll see you next week.
Okay, thanks.
Thank
Bye,
you
everybody.
so much, Derek and Jennifer. Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on New York Bio, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.